Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest, and I live here in Austin, Texas. I've had the gift of recovery since December the 27th of 1972. And the purpose of these podcasts is to take a deeper dive into the world of 12 steps, as well as the psychology, the history, the spirituality that underlie recovery from addictions of all sorts. Okay? I want to thank all of our supporters who generously contribute to keeping the ship afloat. I really do appreciate that. And I also want to encourage folks, if you haven't done so already, please go to our two-way prayer website and learn more about the form of prayer and meditation that was done in the early days of AA when it was coming over from the Oxford group. And some of us have found that to be a genuine life changer, and our hope is that you may find it that way as well. So this is the second in our series on interventions, and my guest is Debra Jay. Jeff is the author of Love First, A Family's Guide to Intervention. I've put a link to the book. If you're watching it on YouTube, that's what the cover looks like. Put a link to it in the show notes, and you'll also find there a website that Jeff maintains. It's got lots of good information on addiction, on the intervention process, and most particularly on the whole subject of family recovery. So I encourage you to go to that website, and I think you'll be impressed with the information that is there. Jeff and his wife, Debra, are strong believers that addiction involves the whole family and that it responds best to family recovery. And Jeff is also in long-term recovery himself, recognized as an expert in the field of addiction and intervention training. So welcome back to the podcast, Jeff. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
First episode was really good. If you guys didn't see that, I'd go back there and start with that one. So before we begin looking at what is a structured intervention, and we're going to get into that in the next episode, but before we do that, you make an interesting comment in your book that when alcoholics and addicts do decide to get help on their own, that they aren't really deciding on their own. You say usually if they go to treatment or go into 12-step recovery, it's not because they see the light, but because they feel the heat.
Well, it's true. You see, almost everybody is going into treatment because of some kind of intervention. It's maybe a DUI or a pending divorce or breakup of relationship or financial problem, medical problem, work problem, what have you. Or if you're really, really lucky, you may get a loving family intervention, which is not chaotic and so forth. But most people don't just, raise their hand and say, oh, gee, I think I've got a problem. I think I'll clear my schedule and go away to treatment for a month. It just doesn't happen that way. There's usually something, some kind of unplanned legal, medical, or otherwise intervention that is going to propel someone into treatment. So they're feeling the heat more than they are seeing the light.
You also raise the concept of raising the bottom, that the alcoholic doesn't have to go all the way down if the family does intervene. And that's what happened to me. I mean, it was a therapist who told me I was not at a physical bottom.
Mm-hmm.
I had 10 more years of drinking, but I'd never make it. But because I was at a spiritual bottom and an emotional bottom. He kind of intervened on me, sent me on a course of treatment, in effect, that shaved 10 years off of my drinking.
Yes. And it's true, back in the day when AA first came about, the understanding was that people really had to hit bottom in a very physical, emotional, spiritual way, and it had to be profound to get them to the point of willingness to work a program of recovery. And that was the understanding. And thankfully, we have come quite a ways from that time. And we do know now how we can raise the bottom so that people don't have to lose everything. I mean, Sure, you can lose everything. You can go out there and, lose the relationships and the job and just lose everything and hit bottom in the classical sense. But who wants to do that?
And that's no guarantee that it's going to register if that happens either, is it?
No, it's not.
No.
No, people can bounce along the bottom for years. What we have found is that when the family and friends come together in a very organized way, very specific and organized way, that we can raise the bottom to now, and in almost all cases, bring the person to a moment of clarity where they will accept the help that's being offered and go to treatment.
Mentioned last time, I've done a fair number of interventions myself. I found it very important to compartmentalize the process, that at this phase, this is what we're focused on. And if you do that successfully, it's going to naturally lead to the next phase. And if that is done successfully, it will lead to the next phase. It's a process.
Correct. Yeah, that's very, very true. Oftentimes when we are bringing the family and friends together, they want to get into all kinds of other issues.
Yeah.
And that is a death knell for the intervention. So part of the job of a clinical interventionist is to keep the family on track and to have a laser focus. We're going, as you say, it's a process. We're going step by step by step. And our proximate goal, our initial goal is to, well, first of all, bring the family and friends together and get them trained and rehearsed. But the goal of all that is to get the person into treatment. But that is not the end. That's just the beginning, because there are many phases beyond that, because our real goal is not simply treatment. We want to be happy again as a family. We want to, restore the love and security of the family.
Which brings me to my next question. In chapter 9 of the book, this grabbed my attention. You asked the question, what do you think is the most important factor in the relationship amongst members of the family? And you say most people answer love, but you don't agree with that. What do you think is the most important?
Trust.
Trust.
It seems like it should be love.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, you may have a family member, especially if they've really gone, down into their addiction, and you still love them, but you don't trust them anymore.
Right.
Because the disease has taken them away. They've become fundamentally untrustworthy, not because they decided, or had some great shift in their character, but, they're dealing with a hijacked brain. Trust is really the bedrock for bringing the family back together. And interestingly, as the individual kind of goes down their path into the, swirling mess of addiction, the family often mirrors them in many ways and also becomes untrustworthy. And that's shocking for family. What are you talking about? Well, here's what I'm talking about. How many times have you said, I'm not going to stand for that anymore? And then you do. I'm not going to, bail you out in certain ways anymore. And then you do. So even family members will find that they are becoming untrustworthy in this area of their life. So it's dragging everybody down. So rebuilding trust and showing that as a family member, I'm going to say what I mean and mean what I say, and I'm actually going to follow it. And for the person who's just coming into recovery from their chemical dependency, whatever their substance use disorder is, or behavioral use disorder, the wrong question for the newly recovering addict is, when is my family going to trust me again?
Right.
And everybody asks that too.
Sure.
But the better question is, what am I doing today to show that I am trustworthy? Am I sticking with my treatment plan, my aftercare plan? Am I going to 12-step meetings? Am I actually participating? Do I have a sponsor, a home group, a service commitment? What are the things that I am doing that demonstrate that I am going to be trustworthy again, or I am trustworthy again today?
When someone is in early stages of recovery, it's beneficial if they are able to see that they don't trust themselves at some level. You follow me?
Oh, that's so true.
Yeah. Because the guys and the women who say, I got it, I'm never going to drink again. I'd much rather hear someone say, well, I
Yes.
can't promise that.
I'm laughing because I used to say that early on in my recovery. I'm like, I know I can't trust myself any further than I can throw myself.
Right.
And I meant that in somewhat of a humorous way, but also in a very hard factual way, that I knew that my brain was still, pretty squirrely.
Yeah.
And I was completely bought into the idea of one day at a time, going to a meeting, doing the deal, really, I mean, that made so much sense to me.
Mhm.
That if I could just focus on today and what am I doing today with regard to my recovery, that I was much more likely to be successful.
You talk about the difference between assembling an intervention team and structuring a family recovery team. Can you tell our listeners what you mean by that?
Yes, in the latest edition of Love First, the third edition, we've abandoned the idea of an intervention team,
Mm.
which is kind of the older
I
terminology.
grew up with that. Old Vern Johnson, I'll quit tomorrow.
All the way back. And instead, we're talking about a recovery team. Why? Because an intervention team has an expiration date. When we do the intervention, we get the person into treatment. Okay, we're all done. Fantastic.
Right.
We're all, we have accomplished the mission. No. It's great. It's the initial goal. It's fantastic, but we need to continue on because we've actually, in bringing together the family and friends and training them and rehearsing them and everything else, we're really building up a lot of momentum, moving into recovery. Why would we want to, dismiss that team and lose all of that momentum within the family? It's the wrong thing to do. And that's where we move into the idea of structured family recovery. So we give that family and friends group something new to do. And we start taking them through the 12 steps on the Al-Anon side and get them going to meetings and working with a sponsor and getting a service commitment and all that stuff so that they continue their recovery journey. And they're setting, what academics would call a very positive social norm within the family. We are going to be a 100% recovery family. We're going to be on the Al-Anon side. You may be on the NA or SAA side or whatever it is. But we are going to continue this recovery journey. And then as the person comes out of treatment, they can join that family recovery team. And everybody's moving into recovery together without getting into each other's business. That's a very important point. We're not, like checking up on each other or making comments about each other or anything like that. Part of the beauty of structured family recovery is to make sure that everybody stays in their own business. We're doing this together, but we're not there to micromanage each other because that can be a death knell for recovery.
And sometimes I see it where if that does not happen, the alcoholic or the addict starts getting well and the family stays fragmented and kind of promotes the dissolution of the family.
That is so true. And I witnessed that very early on. And it was explained to me. I mean, much like you're saying, if let's say the alcoholic, they get into recovery, they go to treatment, they start, and they're taken off and the spouse is still down here. Well, it can be very detrimental to the marriage and can lead to divorce. Why? Well, because all of a sudden, let's say we'll take the stereotype, okay, where it's the husband that went to treatment.
Right.
And the wife has been holding the whole family together forever. They both work, but she's having to do everything. She's doing 100% of everything. Well, now, I've been sober 15 minutes in AA says, hey, I want to be dad again. I want to be husband again. I want to be a co-equal partner. And she's looking at him going, you dirty, right? I mean, because she's still, feeling all the pain and stress and duress of having to hold everything together for the last 6 years or whatever it's been. So they actually grow apart unless she begins her recovery journey herself and begins to see, and I apologize for using the stereotype of, but just for purpose of example, if everybody doesn't get into recovery together, there will be rifts, there will be problems, and it may be more difficult in the relationship early on than if the person hadn't gone to treatment at all.
Do you bring the children into the training sessions? At what
Only
age?
if they're like 16 and older. And even then, I mean, sometimes we'll go as low as 14, but it can be pretty dicey because information that may come out that is not appropriate. And so we have to evaluate that very carefully. That's something to discuss with your clinical interventionist. And we don't take that lightly. Kids know what's going on, but that doesn't mean that they should be involved in all of the discussions. You know, I mean, you may have a 14-year-old who's right in the mix, but we don't want to bring them into necessarily the whole family debrief and the training and stuff like that. It can be a little touchy.
Okay.
But we may have a letter from them. We may have a note from them.
Right.
And in some cases, we do want them present. It's case by case.
Mm-hmm. Right. Let's talk a little bit about enabling, because in the early stages, that's one of the things that you're getting, hopefully helping people to see how they have contributed. I've heard it said, an alcoholic or an addict, they need an enabling system to keep their drinking or drugging going.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Everybody's got some kind of an enabling system. Mm-hmm. And to break it down into the simplest terms, which is probably a good place to start, there are kind of two phases of enabling. The first phase, we're starting to see the early consequences of the addiction. And the family says, oh my gosh, Jeff crashed a car, or Jeff, is having problems in school or work or something like that. And they don't see it as a big full-blown problem yet. And so they try to cushion the consequences. They hire the lawyer, they do this, they do various things that cushion me from the natural consequences of my actions. And their actions are innocent. So it's what we call innocent enabling. They're just doing what any family would do, kind of rushing in to help a family member who is having problems. But then as time goes on and the consequences start to accumulate and more things happen, then families can move into the next stage, the later stage, more desperate enabling, where they say, oh my God, look, he's got a real alcohol and drug problem. Now we've really got to step in and save him, or he's going to wind up in prison like those people. Those people, they live on
those people. Yes.
They're not like us. They're, we got to do something here. And so they lend more money. They hire more lawyers. They, make sure the person gets, whatever kind of cushion they need. They lie to the boss, or they lie to the judge, or, whatever. And they are now starting to mirror the addict. They're becoming dishonest, doing things that they could have never imagined themselves doing 5 years ago. And they are going down the tubes with the person. And that's really not going to change until they get some real help. I'll tell you a heartbreaking story. I did an intervention years ago. It was on a 28-year-old son who was addicted to heroin and so forth. And his father was actually like 30 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And do you know that when the son would call, the father would drive down to a pretty bad neighborhood to buy his son's heroin because he didn't want to give him the money himself and he didn't want him going into that neighborhood. And so he would buy the heroin and deliver it to his son.
Wow.
And whenever the son called, even if it was 10 o'clock at night, he'd get in the car and go do it. Now, that was impossible for anyone in the family to believe. And if anyone had told him, the father, that he was going to do something like that. Some years previous, he would have said, yeah, that's crazy. But he became so worried about what would happen to his son that he was willing to do anything to protect him.
That's a powerful story. Have you had the experience where if you're going to do a successful intervention on an alcoholic or addict, you first have to do a successful intervention on a super enabling family member?
Yes.
Because that's what you're kind of describing there.
And really, I think of it as being an intervention on the whole family, because while there might be a super enabling family member, the other family members, even though they're not the super enablers, they've been just turning away from looking at that super enabling. So they're kind of, they don't like it, but they're throwing up their hands. So we've really got to get the whole family and friends system on the same page. People can do that by reading the book or listening to the intervention workshop or working with a professional. Obviously, it's easier if you have the resources to bring in a professional, because then you have kind of an ombudsman for the whole family who's going to say, no, this is right, this is wrong, this is why, this is, et cetera, and really walk them through the process as a group. But you're absolutely right. The first intervention is always on the family and friends, and perhaps there is a super enabler there too.
We've touched on this already, but let's perhaps go a little bit deeper, look at it maybe from another angle. Chapter 18 is titled How to Create a Home for Lasting Recovery. And you make an interesting statement. You say intervention is always a beginning, and understanding this changes everything. It's why we no longer call ourselves an intervention team. Something happens when I've done interventions and I'm training the family. It's like they come awake, and the power begins to shift. The power was vested almost completely in the alcoholic and the addict. They're terrified of him or her. I hear them describing this alcoholic or addict. I go into the house and the guy's 5'2", and I was imagining someone who's 8'10".
Yes. Yes.
But the power shifts. You almost know the thing is going to work because the family has started this recovery process.
Oh, it's so true. It's such a powerful thing. And I want to take a moment before I get into this whole question and everything by giving credit to Debra, my beautiful, brilliant wife, Debra Jay, who is actually the final writer of the book. And her name should be first and mine should be second.
I think in the fourth edition, I was talking to her. She said it will be.
About time.
It's about time. That's what I told her.
She has, there are some beautiful sentences in there, and I just want to give her credit because it's rarely, my idea in the way that some of these things are said. Anyway, building a recovery team and making sure that is the real nugget of what we are doing, the real core of what we are doing. It creates this shift within the family that almost makes it inevitable that the person is going to recover. Even if they say no on intervention day, even if they walk out, even if, blah, blah, blah. The fact that everyone has now made common cause, there's so much power in the group. It's like when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among you. There's all of a sudden this great spiritual power that is so much stronger than the addiction.
Yeah.
Because, one of the things that happens classically is that the alcoholic or addict will play one person off against another. And they become very expert in that. And it's very manipulative and everything else. And when everybody comes together and they have a new understanding of the illness and a new understanding of the recovery process, well, now the family and friends group is just imbued with this tremendous power. And it's all out of love. It's all out of a new and deeper understanding. And it just clears the way for recovery.
And there's a commitment to honesty. Let's stop playing the games. Mm-hmm. It's gotten us nowhere. And it just has to stop. And
Yes.
that commitment you can feel, and it's so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Amazing.
It's a beautiful thing. I am sometimes just amazed, not sometimes, like almost always just amazed the way family and friends come together. They discover this new power that they have. They come together in this very organized way that we lay out for them. And it's just like getting on a freeway instead of the surface streets. You can just take off.
Yeah. I went to one of the most powerful AA 12-step meetings in Ohio many, many years ago. I'd never seen anything like it. They had 3 speakers. One speaker came out, and the other 2 did not hear what that person said. They were all from the same family. And so the Alateen came out, and he told his story in about 10 minutes. And then the father came out, and he was the Al-Anon, and he told his story, his perspective. And you could just feel the power building and the inability of the next one to come out and tell a lie and say, well, it wasn't that bad. You already knew it was bad, you know? And then the alcoholic was the last one to come out. And by that time, I mean, people were always, of course, rooting for her, but it was, we already know the secrets, you know? She shared her perspective. It was just such a beautiful thing.
It's true, and it changes everything for generations to come.
Yes.
You know, as Debra often says, the fact that my parents were able to intervene and get me into treatment and everything, that's what allowed our marriage to happen, because we met when I was like 9 or 10 years sober. And, that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And all the work that we've done, I mean, it echoes through the years, through the decades, on and on and on.
Yeah. And my wife was in Al-Anon even before she met me. But I've made the statement, and I'm not ashamed of it. I don't know that I would have recovered if she did not know and do the things she was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't have made it without that.
I understand that so clearly.
Yeah, some people don't and say, well, that's your problem, that's your weakness. Well, yes, I'm weak, and her doing the right things at the right time and not buying into my BS was tremendously helpful.
Absolutely. It's a little bit sad, isn't it? That, I mean, in 12-step, we're so focused on the we of the program. We talk about it all the time, but when someone makes a statement like you said, I couldn't have I don't know if I would have made it without her, and, expanding the we to outside the group into the family, they're like, oh, wow, you must be weak. It's like,
I am.
What are you talking about? Yeah.
Yeah. Chapter 19. We better chug along here.
Okay.
You list 4 primary reasons why every intervention is a success, even those that don't end with the addict or the alcoholic accepting help when it's offered. So I'd like to read these 4 and then have you break down each one, tell us a little bit more about it. But I want to give people the full picture of what's going on here. 1, the family is united through education and open communication. 2, the addicted person hears how much his or her family loves them. 3, the family members have an opportunity to explain how the addiction has affected them. And then 4, the addict learns that the family from now on will only support recovery. So let's take these one at a time and go through them. Number 1, the family is united through education and open communication. What happens?
Yes. In our process, what we call module 1 is we are debriefing the family and friends and so forth. We're using their narrative, their narrative history of what's been going on to provide teachable moments and starting to educate them about the disease of addiction and the dynamics of it and how the whole thing works. And this gives them a new understanding. And they're like, oh, now we understand why Jeff is so far off the deep end and everything. And they start to, instead of just being angry or frustrated, they start to feel a certain amount of compassion and realize, you know what, it's up to us. We need to do something here. We need to get him into treatment. And this is such an epiphany for the family as a whole. So that educational process that goes with preparing for an intervention is so important. That's why, every Friday, like clockwork, we'll get a call at 3 p.m. saying, hey, we're going to do an intervention on our daughter on Saturday. People told us and that we ought to call you and get some tips. Do you have any tips?
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, don't do it.
Yeah.
You're not ready. You need to prepare. There's a lot you need to learn before you go ahead with an intervention.
On the communication, there's a sharing that happens. Oftentimes, their families are divided. There's secrets going on. The parents know this much. The siblings know that much more. The spouse has information that the other people don't have. And as they begin to share that information, the seriousness of the problem grows, and also the commitment to doing the intervention successfully grows. The power of the family grows, right?
No question.
Yeah.
No question. It unifies everyone, and it fills them with a determination that they will take action. And so that initial meeting of everyone together to talk about everything that they know and to share that information it's life-changing for the family.
Right. So the second one, the addicted person is going to hear how much his or her family really loves them.
Yes. People often think that in an intervention, we're going to be really, pointing our fingers at the alcoholic and saying, you did this, you did that, you did the other thing. And there's a little piece.
There's some of that.
There's a little bit. But really, the majority of it is all about love.
Yeah.
Why we love them, why we care about them. Times that we've been proud of them. Times that they've been very helpful to us in our life. Oh boy, they're not expecting to hear that.
Right.
Talking about what our new understanding of addiction and recovery is. Talking about what our commitment is going to be going forward from this day for our own recovery and for the life of the family.
How I screwed up, maybe.
Yeah. So, it's really very different than what most people think. And it's very effective in getting to the heart of the addicted person, because that's where the change has to take place. It's not going to be litigating the thing in their brain. It's really trying to get to their heart. And that's part of the way that we do it.
And if the recovery team members open their hearts, that's the key to opening the heart of the addict.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's really hard for an addicted person to get mad at people who are telling them how much they love them and actually crying and,
right.
and everything else. I mean, it's very moving. It's not accusatory. It's not confrontational. It's really, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Family members have an opportunity to explain how the addiction has affected them in the intervention process.
Yes. That is, we reserve most of that if the person is really digging in and they're not, they're not going. And then we will shift to a little bit more of a bottom line where we're going to say, and even then we're not going to be accusatory or anything like that. Instead, we're going to say, I really need to apologize because I've been sweeping this under the rug and not talking to you about it. And I thought I was being helpful, but I realized that I'm only hurting you and I'm not going to hurt you anymore. So I'm going to start talking about this. In fact, every time I talk to you, I'm going to ask, when are you going to go? And so forth. And so there's even a loving way to say, how we're going to bring about first of all, say how it's affecting us. And second, kind of have a little sugar-coated consequence. They're sugar-coated in the sense of, I'm really just going to start being honest.
Right.
And that you may experience that as a bit of a consequence, but we're not going to say it that way.
Yeah. And I can't cover for you anymore.
Right.
I'm not going to explain. I'm not going to cover with the kids. I'm not going to, I'm going to start living recovery, which is the fourth thing, that the addict learns that the family from now on will only support recovery. If you've got the family to that level, the
Right.
power dynamics have shifted.
Absolutely. We are going to be a family recovery team, regardless of what you decide to do today. And oftentimes, if we're having a really hard time with the addicted person, they may wait and see if that's true. They may test the family, and see, are they really doing what they say they're going to do? Are they really going to start talking openly about it, not covering for me, not bailing me out? They're going to start going to Al-Anon. They're going to start structured family recovery. They're going to do all this. And they're like, oh, now all of a sudden, life is getting a lot more difficult for active addiction. Active addiction is not finding any shadow to hide in the house. And
Right.
yeah, it's big changes coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Important chapter, must read, is does the family need a professional interventionist? Talk about the options there.
Yeah. So many families just read the book and follow the directions. So you can listen to the intervention workshop for free on our website. You can order on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever. You can get the book from your local library. Don't even have to buy it, and follow the directions. It's written in a way that, you can just follow the directions. It's very detailed. But there are times that you need a professional. For example, this is perhaps obvious, if there's been a history of suicidal threats or threats of violence against people, you better have a professional there. Okay. If you've got a history of co-occurring disorders, anxiety, depression, thought disorders, mood disorders, this takes it to another level of complexity, and you're probably going to at least need to consult with a professional. If there's been a history of relapse, they've gone to treatment a number of times and it's just not working, you better get a professional to help evaluate what's been going on and to come up with maybe a little bit more sophisticated of a plan. If it's not straightforward, or if you're just nervous about it, I mean, one thing that people may not understand is that you don't necessarily have to contract with a clinical interventionist to do this whole big intervention process. You can just contract with them for a consultation and strategy session for an hour and go through the basics of it and get a feel for it. And, that may be money well spent. I'm always kind of sad when somebody calls me and they did an intervention and it didn't go well, and they spent a whole lot of money on a treatment center, and I hear the story and I'm like, if you had done a 1 hour session with me, it would have saved about $30,000 and a whole lot of heartache. It can be really good to get professional advice.
When I was doing it, I don't do them anymore. When I was doing them, I had a 95% feeling that the power had shifted enough and the family was committed enough that this thing was going to work. If you can get that family to that place, you can turn them loose. They're going to get the thing done. They don't need me necessarily. Now, you talk in this chapter about different levels of professionalism that might be available to people. Can you speak about those on the part of the interventionist? I mean, hey,
yeah, the interventionist. I mean, we won't even take people into our intervention training unless they're already well qualified as an addiction therapist, either having that certification or an advanced degree and a license or whatever. But we feel that in order to be a good clinical interventionist, you have to have worked in treatment for at least 3 to 5 years and gotten a deep understanding of this process and how it works with patients and everything else. There are many interventionists out there who just have their own recovery. And that's great that they have their own recovery, but that hasn't really taught you how to de-escalate a crisis or how to, do any number of things that you learn in your clinical practice working in a treatment center. So look for an interventionist who has strong addiction credentials, not as a recovery coach, which is something you can take a weekend class on, but they've actually worked in a treatment center. They actually have some level of certification or license or what have you, especially if there are more complex problems like co-occurring disorders. So you have the addiction, but you also have anxiety and depression, or a thought disorder, or multiple addictions going on. Maybe the person is a gambling addict and a cocaine addict. Well, now you may need more help, and you want to make sure that you're working with somebody who has experience in those areas.
And I wasn't planning to get into this, but the selection of the treatment center, if they're going to treatment, that's the goal of the intervention. I mean, they need to be sophisticated and able to deal with multiple addictions and things of that nature too.
I won't even make a treatment recommendation until we've gone through the history as a team.
Yeah.
Because often things will come out. I mean, we might be in our second hour of talking, and all of a sudden they'll bring something up from, 15 years ago when everything changed. Everything changed because there was this car accident, and it was actually a rollover accident. And I'm thinking, you know what? There may be a TBI here. There may be a traumatic brain injury that was never properly diagnosed. So now my treatment recommendation is going to change. I'm going to make sure that they get to a place that has that level of expertise, and they can do some testing once the person's in treatment to rule out a traumatic brain injury, or if there is something there, to do some specialized treatment around that, because that may explain, for example, why they haven't been able to successfully follow a program of recovery. So it's really important that you're working with a clinician as your interventionist, if in fact you're doing that, who has some knowledge and expertise and can tease these little things out, because it may mean the difference long term between success and failure.
Right. And treatment centers themselves have a way of changing over time. I mean, you're really referring to people, and people come and people go. A fellow trained me many, many years ago, and it gave me an insight that has been invaluable. He said that a treatment center is much like an alcoholic or an addict. It has its own recovery life itself. And either it's working its principles and its program and staying true to those, or it's gone off chasing money, power, God knows what else, just like the addict can. I've found that invaluable.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, my heart breaks when I think of, how many formerly good treatment centers are now not so good. And it's part of the job of the interventionist to kind of keep up on what's good, what's not so good, what's been changing, who do I have confidence in as a treatment provider in different.
We're back to that trust thing, aren't we?
We are. I mean, these words came out of my mouth yesterday talking to somebody. I said, I know one of the recommendations I gave you was X, but I'm really not so happy with that now, because upon further investigation, I realized that there have been some changes, and although they're still okay, they're not as highly rated in my own mind right now. And so you could still investigate them, but I think the first two choices that I gave you of the three, I'd put that one at the lowest tier. And that's part of my job, is to make good recommendations.
I would think with the approach you're taking, how the facility is going to treat the family would be a vital component, eh?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, we really look for that too. And often that is the weakest part of even a pretty good treatment center's program, because they don't get reimbursed for that. They get they're kind of doing that gratis, and they may or may not be able to afford to put on the kind of family programming that they would like to.
Yes.
So that's just a fact of life.
Right. Cost of doing business is what the
Yeah.
businessmen would say. If you can't do the family portion, you're not treating them.
The fact is that, insurance reimbursement isn't what it used to be. They're being asked to do more with less, reimbursement and stuff like that. So I understand both sides of it.
And sometimes you just have to piece this together and that together and the other thing. And if we can't get this done there, we'll have to do it here. But you deal with what you got.
Exactly. So this might be the right treatment center, might be not the strongest family program. We'll get them doing structured family recovery. We'll get them plugged into other resources, and that's going to carry them further anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, very good. In the next episode, what I'd like to do is have you walk us through an intervention. We've looked at the illness. We've looked at how the family comes together and gets education, training, and now in the third episode, I'd like us to look at what the exact process is. We'll just make up an imaginary case and you take us through it so people get a feel for what this process is like.
I'll be glad to do that. That sounds great.
Good. Anything you want to add before we close on this this portion, bringing the family together?
All I want to say is that if you have a loved one who is struggling with addiction, there is a lot of hope, and there's almost certainly more that you can do. So I invite people to just learn more. Take a look at the links that are in the description and take that first step.
Yeah, when I came into treatment, when I came into recovery, let me change that. I was told the winners need to go to Al-Anon too, because in AA, you're probably not going to deal with the family dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And most alcoholics and addicts, we have family issues up the wazoo.
Mm-hmm.
Codependency, self-worth, things of that nature that might be better addressed in taking a fuller, more family-oriented approach to the solution.
That's right. Ernie Larson, the late great Ernie Larson, called it Stage 2 recovery. And I call it graduate school for Alcoholics Anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to Al-Anon.
Right.
So yeah,
right.
It's invaluable.
Good. Okay. Well, Jeff, once again, I want to thank you for being our guest. The information has been tremendously helpful. Again, point folks to the show notes and get a hold of that book, and be sure to go on to the website. And the website name is, once again, Jeff?
lovefirst.net.
lovefirst.net. All right. Well, thank you, Jeff, for being our guest.
Father Bill.
And thank you guys for listening. I hope the information was helpful. If you want to get in touch with Jeff, you can contact him through the website, or you can write me and I'll send it on to him. You can write to me at twowayprayer, TWO, twowayprayer @gmail.com. So thank you guys for listening. God bless, and keep coming back.